So this second session, this panel discussion is going to be on water quality, and the moderator is Dean Crable. And Dean is a state resource conservationist from the Natural Resource Conservation Service. So I'm going to turn it over to Dean.
Thank you, Bill. Well, welcome back and good morning again, and welcome to the second session for water. All of us realize the bread of life, if you will, water in the state of Kansas, and the vital importance to our communities for conservation across the board. All the sources or all the resources that water provides, right? That lifeblood for us in Kansas. And we have some significant challenges ahead of us, as well as what we've been facing in the past many years. It's always a challenge to follow a great panel. This morning's panel talking about water quantity. What a great message and story and collaboration and challenges that came from that group of panelists. This panel will be the same. We have a lineup of great experts in the field that serve us in water quality issues in the state of Kansas. And so it's certainly my privilege to moderate this particular group of folks, from private sector to government, to practitioners, if you will, and all the sort that represent us in the conservation community. So I think you'll hear their voice as well. So like with Susan, I will have each of the panelists introduce themselves and their titles briefly, and we'll go through the entire panel, and then we'll get started with some information presentations from each of the panelists. So Landon, if you would.
Thank you, Dean. Landon Oldham with Heartland Soil Services. We're located in Cunningham, South Central Kansas. We focus primarily on precision agricultural services such as grid soil sampling, irrigation tools and water management, variable rate fertility, variable rate seeding, data management, etc. We've had the opportunity of being here last year as well. You'll notice we've got a booth out there with Noah Goza. He is our farm comp. He is our in-house technical service provider for the NRCS. So we try and offer the easy button to help you guys accomplish some of these resource concerns that we're addressing.
I'm Tom Stiles. I'm Director of the Bureau of Water and KDHE. I oversee the programs that administer the federal Clean Water Act and Safe Drinking Water Act here in Kansas. If this was an episode of Sesame Street, we'd be at the part where we'd be playing one of these things that's not like the other. So I'm the regulator up here, and so I've got a little different take on stuff, but I've got the big picture aspect of what water quality means and how you can help us get there.
Yeah, good morning, everyone. I'm Matt Unruh, the Assistant Director of the Kansas Water Office, and I guess first off, I would just like to express my appreciation for KACD and all of you in the room here today. Well, for one, sticking around for the last of the program here as we're looking to close things out from a conference standpoint. I saw some fists in the air there, yes. So hopefully we bring it home in a suitable manner here, but really appreciate KACD recognizing the value of water both from a quantity and quality standpoint for Kansas. And I know there's been a great deal of discussion really over the last several years regarding our state's water resources, and both from a quantity and quality standpoint, some of the challenges that we are encountering both in the eastern and western parts of the state, but really recognizing some of the opportunities for collaboration and partnership moving forward as well. So in the spirit of today's discussion and really over the last several days here, that's really been one of the key themes that I have taken away from a number of the discussions that have taken place. So hopefully this panel can help make some connections in your minds to some of those partnership type opportunities and kind of bring some of the water quality issues of the state to the forefront, and have some thoughts for you to all take home moving forward as we look to address our state's water resource issues both from a quantity and quality standpoint. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Ron Graber. I work for K-State Research and Extension as a watershed specialist. I coordinate the Little Ark RAPS project, and that's one of the things I'll be visiting about with you here in a little bit, and also provide technical expertise in the south central part of the state, even outside of the Little Ark watershed.
Good morning. My name is Fred Jones. I'm the Water Resource Manager for the City of Garden City, Kansas. I'm responsible for the water, wastewater, and now water reuse utilities for the city. We operate 2 wastewater collection systems and 4 public and non-public water supplies in and around Garden City.
All right, again, welcome panelists. So Elliot Carver could not make it today, he's ill, so I will sit in and give an NRCS agency perspective when it comes to water quality as we move through the lineup. So again, water, the connection to life for us in Kansas from the far southwest portion of Kansas, down around Elkhart to far northeast Kansas, all the issues that we're facing, I think now with the panelists as they build out this connection of practical solutions, opportunities to maybe think about innovation, to policies and the sort. There's a tremendous amount of rich information I think you'll hear here today. So with that, I think, Landon, if you're ready, we'll turn it over to you.
All right, so as I mentioned, Landon Oldham, Heartland Soil Services. We focus on the precision aspect. We're helping farmers and growers implement these practices. We're trying to be the easy button. I think what we can really correlate all of this back to is a matter of time, right? So we're trying to implement the conservation practices to address the resource concerns at hand, and people change for 2 reasons. Ron and I were visiting about this earlier, so this is just impromptu, but people change for 2 reasons, and it's 1, because they become educated, or 2, because they're forced to. Obviously, we want to try and take the education route, right? But that deduces down to a matter of time. So the group that we're trying to educate, they are very good at what they've done. They've done it for a long time, and they've done it the same way for a long time. And the problem that we have on the time side is right now we have no labor force. The labor force isn't there. So the growers, the farmers that we're trying to educate to encourage them to change and make these changes, most of them are still at home feeding cows right now, checking water, cutting milo, picking cotton. It's a matter of time. So is there another way that we can address that matter of time? And that's the approach that Heartland Soil Services has tried to take. Ultimately, we have implemented what we call our Farm Comp program with Noah Goza. He's our technical service provider for the NRCS, and we're also in the process of adding another TSP to our team to help our growers manage their time just a little bit more freely, in the fact of we can go out there and we can pull all the measurements, pull the grid soil samples, pull the soil samples, do whatever it might be to allow them to enroll in the programs that are being offered to them, to allow them to implement those practices. So what I'm going to start with is I'm going to go right back to the basics, and it's something that everybody in this room is very well aware of, but here's our major rivers and reservoirs in Kansas. These are the major rivers and reservoirs that we impact on an annual basis. As you go to the east, we're impacting more surface water than we might be groundwater. As you go to the west, we're probably having more of an impact on groundwater than surface water. But with the surface water, this is Milford Lake from 2021. Here's the algae bloom. Now listen, I like to fish, and that really fouls up the fishing when I can't, when I go to the lake and it looks like that, right? But it goes so much further than that. Ultimately, the primary source of what we're dealing with in water quality truly comes back to our nutrient load in the soil. What do we have there, and what do we really know? Our motto from day one has been, unless you test, it's just a guess. And I mean, you can apply that to more than one aspect of life, but this is really the case here. Here's our aquifers. So I live right there in that middle circle with the Great Bend Prairie, Cunningham, Kansas. This is a test from the well at my house. My nitrate levels are more than twice what the caution level advises. that's our groundwater. We have surface water issues that are obviously much more apparent and much more the topic of conversation for even those downstream of us, but the groundwater quality is also the issue that we're facing as well. So there's many metrics that we can implement to try and mitigate these issues. And it's not just there's not one knight in shining armor, if you will, or one solution. It's a combination of all of them. So it's kind of like, okay, where do you start first? It's a catch-22, 6 one way, half a dozen the next. Okay, I'm gonna change my tillage practices. I'm gonna go from conventional till to minimal till, maybe hopefully even progressing onto a no-till concept. Okay, that's great. Now we've mitigated the surface runoff, but what about the groundwater quality that we're still having an impact because of the nutrient load that we continue to apply to the soil, and it's going down, 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 primarily your nitrogen and your phosphorus. I've been an advocate for the last 14 years since I started this company, going on 15, of grid soil sampling. It's basic science. We're taking a soil sample, we're reducing it down to a size that can be represented on an economical basis, because the problem with agriculture is economics will always override agronomics, because the guy's still got to make a living. And so even though I would like to have 1/10 of an acre grid soil sample, the manpower is hard to find. Although I will say, I'm going to side note, the team that we have in place, best team you'll ever find in the world. If somebody in here raised their hand and asked us to build the Empire State Building, I'd raise my hand and say my team can do it. That's how confident I am in my team and our skills. We have got the greatest guys in place. But anyways, I go back to the grid soil sample, and I go back to the economics versus the agronomics. The economics will always win, because what we're trying to ask these guys to do has an impact on their lives, on their families, on their children's, on their quality of life. And it still comes back to time. Grid soil sampling. So this is a test that we had done in 2015. In the top left corner, you'll see that was our grid soil sample. The average carryover, nitrate, nitrogen in 2015, and I went way back just to show that this isn't all drought induced. This isn't just this year. Now the drought has quantified the amount of carryover that we're seeing, because ultimately on a lot of these acres, you've got 3 failed crops with all the groceries for every single one of those crops laying out there, and here we are fixing to go put on the groceries for the next one. This was in 2015. We had an average of 84 units carryover. This is on a wheat field in Pratt County. On average, to the right, you'll see that's our product recommendation. You see the blue streak down the middle. That's his typical application of 2 units per bushel on shooting for 60 bushel wheat. He's at 120 units in that blue stripe. I didn't post the yield data, I should have, but the blue stripe is no different than everything around it. The areas that show no color are areas that we said had ample amounts of nitrogen. We do not need any additional nitrogen in those areas. There is plenty there to help to do what it needs to do. And it did. That field yielded above average and did not experience any yield loss due to the minimal amount of nitrogen we applied. Instead of 120 units applied that year, that grower applied 35.4 units total. So then let's progress to 2016. I wanted to recreate this data set. We went back to the exact same soil sample sites, and we pulled the exact same sample, outside of not being able to send in the exact same soil, as we possibly could. Even in 2016, after having an above average crop, we still had an additional 67 units carryover. We still got a lot of zero application rate. Now we do have a little bit more application. In 2016, we applied 42.4 units, but it wasn't 120 units to the entire field. So where I'm going with this is this the easy button? Is nutrient load and managing nutrient load actually the easy button? Because the grid, everything was done for them. The grid soil sample was provided, be it us, be it whomever you might want to utilize. The variable rate prescriptions were written. The application was made. They were going to make an application anyway. The only difference is now they plugged a thumb drive in and said go instead of just flat rate and everything. And to anybody that says that that's not going to work in my area, I'd say, why does it work in the rest of the world but not in your area? Maybe you don't have the equipment. I mean, you could farm with a 30-20 and still be able to take advantage of these types of services. There's applicators out there that offer those services. There's service providers such as us everywhere that offer those services. Here's an example of a phosphorus recommendation, or a phosphorus surface analysis, not a recommendation. This is a side-by-side of what we did. One year, the left map is in 2013, and the right-handed map is in 2016. In that time frame, we applied no phosphorus to that dark blue area. And we shifted our phosphorus applications to the area in the southwest portion. You can see we've slightly raised that. We didn't get too aggressive, but we have increased that area to more optimal levels. Now, where I'm going to go here is through this information, and unless you test it's just a guess, maybe what we do is we encourage these guys, that might be a pH problem. That might be something entirely different than phosphate, because you got all the phosphate in the world. You just need to be able to access it. So do we need to be looking into the lime in association with this and eliminate that phosphorus application altogether, which is going to eliminate the runoff and the leaching and whatever with nitrogen, whatever else might have happened. So there's more to agronomy than just NPK, and it all correlates back to addressing this resource concern of water quality. It's one of those deals, there's so many programs out there right now offered through the NRCS or even private entities that are helping growers afford to do this. And it's something that we can push the easy button on because they really don't have to do a whole lot versus a lot of the other practices that we'd like for them to partake in are true practice changes such as, no-till. Well, to go from conventional till to no-till, that's an expensive journey, totally different equipment. To start planting cover crops, those, that's a lot of out-of-pocket money and requires another pass on the farmer across that field. So even though that's all going to prevent and that's all good for what we're trying to accomplish, is the starting point starting to try and educate them and save them time and work our way towards that to create better water quality for the state and for the country. So in summary, I don't know how long I've been dean. I told you I'd be respectful of the time I get. Usually I start with the birth of Christ and I'll get to my point, but for the sake of time, the fertilizer systems are out there. The equipment is available. The technology is readily available. I mean, golly, you go to John Deere and even the used tractors you're buying today have this technology in them. Not to mention the brand new tractors. We could significantly reduce ag runoff by just not putting out as much as we do anyways. In that same aspect, we have the opportunity to increase yield potential because now those areas that needed a little bit more got a little bit more, and the areas that didn't. Reduce fertilizer usage potentially by up to a 20%. We could decrease nitrogen and phosphorus losses by roughly somewhere in that 35 or 15 to 30%. Lower nitrogen concentrations in water. Reduce algal bloom risks. Increase yield potential. And ultimately, at the end of the day, there is so many opportunities for growers out here that if they had time to go research and find all of the subsidies that are available, you could cash flow any single crop you want to grow today, and the gravy is just the bushels you sell. You wouldn't have to touch the revenue associated with those bushels with all the programs that are available right now, but you don't have time to find them, and that's hard. Please, by all means, contact Noah Goza. He's been at the booth for the last couple of days for more information. Discuss some of the cost share programs, how we're helping, how we're working side by side with the NRCS and some of these other entities out here, and then let's see if we can help each other achieve the goals that we're looking for.
Excellent. Thank you, Landon, for that. I appreciate the shout out on the TSP side of things. It's going to take a community beyond just our conservation community to tackle these issues. So next up, we have Mr. Tom Stiles, and he's going to talk from, I guess, his words, a regulator's optics or set of perspective. So, Tom.
Thanks, Dean. And thank you to KACD. I don't often come down and engage you all. And thanks, Landon, for kind of teeing up as a possible pathway that we can reach mutually favorable objectives as well. Let me give you a little glance into my sandbox, which is defined by the Clean Water Act. Those are what the expectations are in the Clean Water Act. We have water quality standards, which everyone flouts around as saying that's what defines water quality. And everyone fixates on the numbers associated with that. There are criteria there, but we also have narrative criteria that basically I think are every bit as powerful in defining what constitutes good quality. But I think the most important part of water quality standards are the underlying designated uses. Water quality has no meaning unless it's tied to a use. Within our standards, we have 7 designated uses, and really 4 of them are primary drivers for our actions that we take to try to reduce or eliminate the discharge of pollutants into our waters: aquatic life, recreation, domestic water supply, or groundwater recharge. We also have irrigation and stock water and industrial, but they tend to come along for a ride and don't rise up to being a primary driver of what regulatory actions we might contemplate. But those designated uses are what our end game is. It's what we're supposed to basically try to achieve full support for. We check that by a rigorous monitoring network. We have a very spatially diverse and dense network of our surface waters, both streams and lakes. Groundwater, we've been asleep at the wheel until this coming year. We've re-engaged, courtesy of the Kansas legislature with appropriations and from the governor's office, to get Kansas Geological Survey to reinvigorate and restart the groundwater quality network. Because in the forefront of the last 5 years over quality issues, groundwater has risen up again in terms of concerns relative to the quality of water that's lying within our vast aquifers for subsequent use up on the surface. Total maximum daily loads is where I kind of cut my teeth. It's basically when the monitoring says, hey, the water's not up to snuff, it's not meeting standards, we need to do something about that. And those were tended to be more strategic plans to try to reduce loading from both point sources and non-point sources to try to reattain those water quality standards. NPDES is pretty much KDHE's realm. That's where we regulate the discharge of those pollutants from industries, facilities, large animal feeding operations and the like. And then the rest of the world is non-point source. This is where KACD can come to play in as well, because it's not regulated. It's a function of what's going on in the landscape. It's where you utilize technical services like what Landon does to basically control the input of material on the landscape to assure that when it leaves the landscape, it comes off as biomass and commodity crops, not runoff-borne pollutants. So, if you want to define Kansas in numeric terms, it's 13, 35, 87, 99. We're the 13th largest state in the country. A lot of real estate out there for us to basically try to impose our will on, to have it manipulated to do what we want out of it and get good benefits out of it. Conversely, we rank 35 in terms of population. So our population centers are little pinpricks on the state map. Very localized areas of intense activity, but in the context of an overall watershed, drowned out by the overall land use. And that land use, 87% of the state, is agriculture, split almost 50-50 between grassland and cropland. And then finally, and this is not insignificant, 99% of the land held in the state is in private hands. We recognize that there is a public-private partnership opportunity and a latent friction that just comes when government starts interceding into people's lives. And with the goal of trying to achieve water quality, we have to find that diplomatic approach to try to achieve, though, that end game. Now, that's the Kansas landscape. Just to get to what water quality is, you just add water. 15 inches in the west, 45 inches to the east. Those factors are what define what water quality looks like here in Kansas. Our 4 biggest categories of pollutants of concern: sediment. We see it certainly in streams, scouring, habitat, but it's more noticeable to the public and by utilities for what Matt has to manage with the reservoirs and the reservoir filling of sediment and loss of conservation storage. Nutrients is probably our #1 issue.
Landon showed you the picture of the bloom at Milford. That is the public manifestation of what excess of nutrients look like. But he also touched on what we don't think about, but which is starting to rise up more and more as a concern, which is nitrates in our groundwater. And that's every bit as important of what's happening up on the surface when it comes to nutrient management. Pathogens, again, it's always been attributed to recreation, and yet 99% of the land is held privately, which means the bed and the banks of our streams, for the most part, except for the Ark or the Kansas or the Missouri, are privately held as well. So recreation on our stream systems is somewhat limited. Our aquatic recreation tends to focus on public access on reservoirs. But more and more, pathogens is more than just the question of being able to support recreation. As we get into watertight situations, and we look toward Garden Fred and Garden City or Dodge City, and they want to employ water reuse. First thing that we're going to be concerned with is how are you dealing with the pathogens coming from your wastewater that you're ultimately going to try to turn back into your water supply. And how do you basically do that? More than just E. coli bacteria, but also how do we make sure that underlying viruses are adequately treated so that they present no threat to the public. And then finally, minerals. The underlying geology of Kansas certainly comes up and presents issues for us on our surface waters. And this also is probably where irrigation comes into play more often than not, with chloride intrusions. For the public water supplies, they're dealing with arsenic more and more. Uranium, certainly in the Southwest, has become an issue of concern for the domestic water suppliers. By training, I'm a hydrologist, so the hydrograph always holds to me the holy grail of how I want to express things. This is a typical hydrograph, but it also delineates the various levels of influence and responsibility. Base flow, dry weather flow, that's where the Clean Water Act basically cut its teeth. What all the attention toward regulating point sources was focused on to basically eliminate those discharges into that. And the water quality influence under base flow is certainly coming from our discharging facilities. As we start adding rain and the hydrograph begins to rise, that's where non-point source begins to assert itself and begin to overwhelm whatever influences might be coming from the regulated facilities. And that's where entities like KACD, the Division of Conservation, our RAPS program, try to make some influence on trying to negate the water quality impacts that come as that hydrograph begins to rise and we start seeing runoff. And that's well and good, but they'll reach a point where there's enough rain being put on the land that it overwhelms us. It starts becoming more of an act of God situation. If it's a stream system, we can take the hit because it's here today and it's gone tomorrow. And that little transient incident of water quality impairment may not really be an impairment for the designated uses. They just, as the river recedes, the designated uses return. If it's a stream that goes into a reservoir, it's a different matter. Now Matt has to deal with what's coming in there because the reservoir doesn't care. It takes all comers, whether it's a trickle day in and day out or the occasional big flush that comes in there. 95% of the typical loads going into the reservoir happen in 5% of the year. So how do you manage that, and how do you look at what the impact that has on our reservoirs? Ending things as I basically present the segue to the rest of the panel. If we talk about implementation, again, water quality doesn't mean anything in terms of a lofty goal if you can't have a realistic plan for implementation. My degree, my major, was watershed science, and so the watershed has always held kind of that magic for me and say, that's the way you manage resources. Watersheds erase county lines. They don't care about administrative boundaries, and they also don't care about the boundary between urban areas, city limits, and the surrounding countryside. When a raindrop falls, if it falls inside city limits, it potentially gets regulated. If it falls on the other side, it's non-point source. We have to basically merge in some partnership and say it doesn't matter which approach we're taking. We just have to work together to try to mitigate the impact of that rainfall dropping on our shared watershed. Hydrology dictates what's possible. There are limits to what we're able to do hydraulically, and to what degree does a respective program and individuals have to basically manage how water interacts with the landscape there. Mitigating land use, and essentially Kansas water quality is defined either by point source discharges or runoff coming off our land use. How do we mitigate that is a function of what happens on the farm on site. And that's a mix of structural practices to hold water in place, but also behavioral practices not to overload our landscape with material that can't be utilized on site and is going to migrate off. Because the end game for us to be successful with water quality is going to be to prevent those off-site impacts from migrating off your respective farms. That's whether it's going downstream or down gradient into the underlying aquifers. Management up on the surface is the key for us to see good, successful water quality. So again, recognizing the watershed, it integrates, and it's going to integrate the diverse partnership that comes as a result from KACD, the Water Office, Division of Conservation, K-State, our RAPS program, and our CS. All of us have different takes on how to do things. They all work. One size doesn't fit all. And then we bring in the technical service providers to help us inform and spread awareness because in the end, implementation is an individual's game, and it's an individual's choice. So with that, I look forward to continuing working with you as we strive to improve the water quality we have in this great state of ours. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Tom, for that great message. Kind of pulling it all together from a state's Department of Health, if you will, perspective. It certainly gives us, good foundation to work from and right into our next conversation, talking about planning at the state level. So, Mr. Matt.
Thank you, Dean. And I appreciate the setup for kind of the transition to my portion of the discussion here, really looking to try to bring things around to more of the, I guess, the opportunities, setting the stage when it comes to state resources, supporting partnership and collaboration, and some of the investments that have taken place really over the last several years to position the state of Kansas to engage in some of these field scale type efforts and other partnership related activities to work to address our water quality issues from both a local, regional, and statewide standpoint. So what I'm going to be doing as far as kind of the transition of the slides here, and let me see if I can do the transition here. Okay, so we're moving now. First things first, how many of you are familiar with the Kansas Water Office? Do you know that we have a state water office? Do you know what we do? We do not regulate water quality. Tom mentioned that they are the regulatory agency when it comes to a water quality standpoint here in the state. We do not issue permits for water use. That is Department of Agriculture's Division of Water Resources. What we do, per our primary statutory charge, we are charged with development and coordination of implementation of the state water plan. In the slide here, there's a lot of information on here. If you need any sort of reading material tonight to kind of decompress from the Chiefs game last night, if you're looking at fumbling the remote and dropping passes, throw rolls coming Thanksgiving, got some reading material for you here if you're interested in our statutory charges. But really, what we look to do is coordinate with our agency partners, the Kansas Water Authority as well, really to help set water policy and planning efforts for the state of Kansas moving forward. And again, we were established in 1981 as the Water Planning Policy and Coordination Agency for the state of Kansas. Bringing it to the state water plan side of things, we would have just went through the review and update process of our Kansas water plan, and hopefully a number of you are familiar with that particular effort here in the state. A recent water plan update was approved by the Kansas Water Authority last August, 2 Augusts ago, August 2022. And through that water planning process, really, we look to engage with a number of stakeholders and partners, and I know a number of the conservation partners in the room here, as well as some of our regional advisory committee members, would have had an active role in the development, review, and ultimate approval process of that water plan, helping to set the stage and foundation for priorities and activities moving forward, supporting water plan implementation. And just in a real brief snapshot format, what I would like to do is just draw your attention to the primary guiding principles and priorities that we have within the state water plan right now, touching on, first off, conserve and extend the High Plains aquifer, secure, protect, and restore Kansas reservoirs, improve the state's water quality, reduce vulnerability to extreme events, and increase awareness of Kansas water resources. So as far as the foundational components of our state water plan that would have been approved by the Kansas Water Authority in August 2022, those really serve as the guiding principles that help guide coordination-related activities, progress, policy recommendations, implementation actions, and recommendations moving forward as we look to advance implementation of the Kansas Water Plan. And kind of bringing it to that third of the 5 guiding principles on the screen here to a water quality standpoint, one of the core charges of our water plan as it sits right now is to improve the state's water quality. So we've kind of touched on, and Landon and Tom both really did a good job of setting the stage of some of the challenges that we have, both from a surface water and groundwater quality standpoint across the state. The water plan sets our North Star as far as progress and recommendations moving forward to address our state's water quality, among the other guiding principles as well. Some of you might also be familiar with the regional issues and priorities that are reflected within the Kansas Water Plan as it sits currently. So for each of our 14 regional planning areas, and the map on the screen here reflects how the state is broken out from a water planning standpoint, each of those 14 regions that you would see on the screen here have regional issues and priorities that have been identified through our regional advisory committees that are in place for those respective communities, goals for those respective priorities that have been identified in action plans and an implementation framework to look to address those regional issues and priorities that have been identified through that stakeholder input from each of our 14 regional planning areas. So that gives us the context from a state standpoint, a Kansas Water Office standpoint, of our issues and priorities from a statewide standpoint and regional standpoint when it comes to addressing all of the guiding principles of the water plan, but particularly for this discussion, water quality related considerations when it comes to issues both in the east and west. And just briefly too, I would want to just reference where, if you have not seen the Kansas Water Plan and are interested in finding out where you can go to get access to it, our Kansas Water Office webpage, kwo.ks.gov, there's several locations that you can go to get access to it. On our homepage, we've got a scroller that would have access to the water plan as it is right now. Toolbar across the top of the screen, there's a water plan related drop down that would bring you to our Kansas Water Plan page, and there's several locations from that drop down that you would be able to gain access to the water plan as a whole. So if you're interested in finding out more of the details as far as the issues and priorities that are identified within the Kansas Water Plan, definitely encourage all of you to take a look at that. So where that leaves us from a water quality standpoint really gets us to this point in time where there's a synergy of efforts and just an overall emphasis and effort to prioritize water resources in the state, both from a quantity and quality standpoint. And I would really like to, start out from that prioritization standpoint, looking to highlight some of the recent efforts that have taken place from an administration standpoint, Governor Kelly's administration, as well as the support of the Kansas legislature to look to provide additional funding for the state water plan fund as a whole. So I believe during the Kansans for Conservation presentation yesterday, a number of you would have been sitting in on that. I would have touched on some of the opportunities that are currently in place from some of these additional funds that have been provided through legislative action and Governor Kelly's approval to support Kansas Water Plan implementation and increased funding for the State Water Plan Fund as a whole. And what I would like to highlight for this particular audience, and I know I've had a number of individual discussions with many of you here at the conference would be some of those opportunities that exist currently that position the state really in a place that we have not been up to this point, of having additional resources that we can bring to the table to partner with any number of partners, and conservation districts are really one of our key partners that we have when it comes to delivery of conservation across state. We're looking to engage in partnerships both in the east and west to address our water quality issues across state. So this additional funding positions us from a state standpoint to be able to advance implementation related activities, engage in partnership and collaboration, as well as having additional state water plan fund resources to leverage federal resources and other private and nonprofit, any number of outside resources to advance those implementation activities. And I would draw your attention to several of the funding lines within the state water plan fund as it sits currently for how we are looking to support some of those opportunities. So starting out from a Kansas Water Office standpoint, 2 of the partnership funding lines that we have within the state water plan right now would be our High Plains Aquifer Partnerships funding line and the Water Quality Partnerships funding line. What that is providing support for currently would be what Weston McCary is doing with our WISE program in the western part of the state, as well as serving as our overall contribution support for the High Plains Aquifer Partnership that KDA Division of Conservation, that many of you are familiar with the award that NRCS just announced, providing $25 million for High Plains Aquifer RCPP support across the entirety of the High Plains Aquifer region within the state. So Kansas Water Office is a partner along with Division of Conservation on that particular effort. So these additional state water plan fund resources provide us the opportunity to pool resources with Division of Conservation and other partners to advance implementation related activities to benefit the High Plains Aquifer as a whole. Those partnership opportunities and resources also exist through our Water Quality Partnerships funding line. And I know a number of you are familiar with the Milford Lake Watershed RCPP project, which has just recently received a renewal for an additional 5 years of funding to support nutrient management related activities above Milford Lake to help address nutrient loading that contributes to the formation of harmful algal blooms within Milford Lake. That Water Quality Partnerships funding line within the State Water Plan Fund provides the Water Office the opportunity to have resources from a financial standpoint to pool with NRCS and the number of additional partners that we have for that respective RCPP project to provide over $6 million in one-time type support, and doubling up on that really with the new term of the RCPP to advance nutrient management related activities within that respective watershed. Another partnership opportunity, and I know the conservation district managers that are involved with Kansas Reservoir Protection Initiative have really been one of the vital pieces of the overall conservation partnership when it comes to delivery of resources to support our Kansas Reservoir Protection Initiative. That's an additional funding line that we have within the Water Office's budget that looks to provide financial assistance resources above 7 of our reservoir watersheds. So Tom mentioned some of the challenges that we have from a state standpoint, both on the nutrient loading, harmful algal bloom standpoint, as well as reservoir sedimentation. So part of this additional funding that the legislature has provided us has given us the opportunity to expand the number of watersheds that we can provide additional financial assistance support for sediment reducing practices above these reservoirs in the state to decrease that sediment loading and ultimately working to address or slow down the actual sedimentation rates of those respective reservoirs. So Kansas Reservoir Protection Initiative is available right now in the Fall River, Canopolis, John Redmond, Hillsdale, Perry, Pomona, and Tuttle Creek Lake watersheds. And really one of the things that I like to highlight with this, and I would hope that the conservation partners that are involved with this effort would feel the same way too. I feel that this is really one of the unique efforts that we have from a state water plan fund standpoint that really serves as a foundation and promotion of collaboration amongst multiple entities, RAPS projects within those respective watersheds, conservation districts within these eligible areas, and our regional advisory committees that are in place within these respective areas. So from just an overall program administration standpoint, we recognized early on in development of Reservoir Protection Initiative the efficiency that we have for delivery of conservation and utilizing the conservation districts and the CSIM system for the administration piece of delivery of conservation dollars to eligible landowners within these watersheds. So we engage with the respective conservation district managers and Division of Conservation using the CSIM system for delivery of dollars to support Reservoir Protection Initiative efforts. We coordinate with Division of Conservation and KDHE, the watershed management section, as far as identification of the reservoir watersheds that we look to prioritize these dollars are, and look to align those priority areas for implementation within those respective watersheds to align with RAP's priority areas. So some of the watershed planning efforts that have taken place through the RAPS program here in the state, we align priorities with that, and then have the regional advisory committees engaged with the overall determination of future priorities and determination of some of the funding considerations and priorities as we look to go to award status for that. So I think that that's one of the ways that we've tried to promote innovation, coordination, and collaboration utilizing state water plan fund resources. And I think with the investment in resources continuing to increase with that, I would anticipate that that sort of collaboration would continue into the future as well. And I'm glad that I included this last bullet point on this one. I don't have the full level of details to provide on this, but when Landon and Tom both touched on the nitrate piece of groundwater quality issues, one thing that I do think would be of note for this respective audience to be aware of would be state water plan fund resources that are provided to KDHE to support their drinking water protection program. And really the focus of that program and the dollars at this point is looking to provide some of these financial assistance and planning related technical assistance dollars to communities that are approaching that MCL threshold when it comes to nitrate levels within their respective systems. So the state has recognized this as a priority, looking to provide resources to the public water suppliers and utilities that are seeing increasing trends in nitrate-related levels, and KDHE is working to provide these sort of financial assistance dollars and opportunities for technical assistance and planning dollars to help address some of those water quality issues from a groundwater drinking quality standpoint as well. So that might be something, if there's any sort of opportunity for questions on that front, I would encourage anyone to ask Tom or others from KDH here that are present as well. So looking ahead, excuse me, at some of the future opportunities that exist right now, and this really aligns with some of the funding opportunities that a number of us have had discussions on, and other related partnerships that I think warrant consideration for this particular audience here, starting out with the Kansas Water Plan Partnership Initiative. And this would have been one of the items that I would have brought up during the Kansans for Conservation discussion yesterday. But this partnership initiative really is an effort from the Water Office's standpoint to look to pool several of our existing state water plan funding lines to have one open call for applications to give partners such as conservation districts and others the opportunity to really engage at the state level on the partnership development aspect of Kansas water plan implementation. So this water plan and partnership initiative, we're looking to leverage resources of partners such as conservation districts, universities, water-related districts, any number of eligible entities to address surface and groundwater quality and quantity issues and look to increase overall awareness of Kansas water resources. So some of those guiding principles that I would have touched on from a water plan fund standpoint earlier on in the presentation we are looking to provide resources and partner with any number of eligible entities across the state to advance implementation activities through that Kansas Water Plan Partnership Initiative. So if you have not been to the Water Office's table in the hallway, we have informational cards, and this would be one of the informational cards that's on our table. So if you're interested in finding out more details on that, definitely encourage you to pick up some of those before you leave today. Also, and this kind of fits into the leveraging of resources discussion and partnership opportunities that exist with NRCS as well. And I have had a number of conversations with individuals here in the room as well, trying to explore opportunities for RCPP-related projects, whether it's in the east or western part of the state. So that's one of the programs that we see a lot of success and interest from a water office standpoint, looking to pool partner resources from any number of partners to advance resource implementation and concerns, and providing technical assistance and financial assistance resources in any number of areas across the state. So when we're starting to think about some of those future partnership opportunities that exist in pooling state and federal resources together to help advance implementation-related activities, RCPP continues to provide a good opportunity for us to enter into some of those future partnership opportunities within RCS and other partners as well. Another thing that I'd like to point out, and some of this fits within the RCPP realm, some of this fits individually in a number of the conversations that have taken place in some of our presentations that we've had an opportunity to listen in on here over the last couple days, really touch on some of the public and private partnership opportunities that exist. So those would be opportunities as we're looking at kind of the future and where things might be going, and the opportunity for state resources to support some of these public-private partnerships. That would be another area that I would like to bring to your attention, and there are other examples that I know many of you have in mind. So what can you do to help? For those in the conservation community, I wanted to at least plant some seeds for thought moving forward today that is helpful for us from an interagency standpoint. If you're looking at the state resources and how we look to advance implementation-related activities and some of these partnership opportunities, first things first, we recognize from a Topeka standpoint that we are not able to be in tune and touch with all of the needs from the state of Kansas from all corners. So we need to have open line of communication. We need to hear from you what your needs are on the ground. What are producers telling you? What are the biggest needs from a technical and financial assistance standpoint? We want to hear that. We are in position to modify existing programs or look to develop new programs that help to address those needs, but we really need that input from the ground level to help drive that direction. So communicate those needs to us. Let the Water Office know, let Division of Conservation know, let KDHE know. We want to hear that. Let NRCS know. We can respond to those needs and develop those programs and modify them to address them if we have that line of communication. Facilitate connections, going to kind of the grassroots, ground-up portion of just the overall water planning framework in the state, and how we are equipped to respond to the issues and challenges that exist from a statewide standpoint. We recognize that you are going to be in position to recognize what your needs are in your respective communities and be aware of how you can best move the needle forward when it comes to your respective issues and challenges from a local standpoint. So help us identify who those key players are within your respective communities to help advance implementation-related activities. Help facilitate those connections. Give us those points of contact. We can take that information and start connecting the dots to move the needle forward there. Engage in collaboration. From a partnership standpoint, we all recognize that there's no silver bullet. There's no one individual that's going to drive us in the direction that we need to. It's going to take a collective effort. So all of us need to be engaged in the coordination and collaboration to address both the quantity and quality issues from a statewide standpoint. So be active, be engaged, be collaborators, be partners when it comes to any number of your local, regional, or statewide issues or challenges. Another thing too, and this kind of goes into some of the discussions that I've been a part of as well, and recent meetings that I've been a part of, there's a lot of recognition that maybe the story of successes and challenges is not fully known when you look at from a decision-making standpoint and just a local awareness standpoint. Are there opportunities for us to better tell that story? So when we're looking at our issues and challenges as well as our successes and how we're looking to move the needle forward, help us get the information from you to tell that story. Let's communicate, let's coordinate, let's collaborate, let's tell that story. But we want you to be a part of that and feed that narrative as we're looking to move forward. So help us tell the story. Let's communicate, facilitate, collaborate, get things done. So with that, I've got my contact information on the screen here. Definitely encourage anyone, if you want to follow up with me offline, to express any of your questions that you might have. And I would turn it over to Ron Graber at this point and Fred Jones to kind of finish out the panel. So thank you.
Thanks, Matt. Appreciate the Water Office, the collaboration, the communication, the leadership you provide, and thinking about this bigger vision, right, of tackling these issues. Now, transitioning over to action, right, next up is Ron Graber, and he'll talk about their successes and project.
Okay, thank you. Everybody still hanging with us today? Everybody's awake? Great. Well, appreciate the opportunity to come and visit a little bit about a couple of the projects that I've been involved with here in the Wichita area, and really appreciate the comments from Tom and Matt both. They really set us up nicely for me to follow them and to talk about some of these activities. So bringing urban and rural communities together, and that's really kind of what I want to get at, a little bit of our watershed planning process, and again, a couple of those partnerships. Okay. Green one, I hit the wrong green. There we go. RAPS, we've heard RAPS. Everybody know what RAPS is? Anybody doesn't know what RAPS is? Okay, Watershed Restoration and Protection Strategy. If I'm sure quite a few of you are located within some active RAPS areas. There are 30-some RAPS plans that have been written and developed in the state of Kansas. About half of those have a paid coordinator like myself. The others that maybe don't have that paid coordinator, there are some implementation dollars available, and if you work through KACD, you can access some of those to do some projects. So, but it is a planning process to bring local stakeholders together, take a look at the issues, put together a formal written plan, and then move into the implementation phase of that, and really try to get some practices on the ground, which is what we're all about, is trying to see some change on the landscape. So the Little Ark watershed, we wrote our first RAPS plan back in 2004. We started having some meetings about 2001, 2002, and bringing stakeholders together and trying to take a look at the watershed and maybe figure out what some of those issues might be. Well, the Little Ark watershed here, a big portion of it is in Harvey and McPherson County. The Little Ark River starts in Rice County and kind of winds down, and then it ends up here in Wichita and the confluence with the Big Ark River. The watershed is very intensively farmed. Corn, soybeans, and wheat would be the primary crops that are grown in the watershed. But you can see about 2/3 of that land mass is actually in annual crops, not very much grass, a little bit. We do have the Equus Beds aquifer under a big portion of the Little Ark watershed, so we have a groundwater source that is available to us. And so when we take a look at all of the cropping that goes on and a good number of livestock operations, a groundwater aquifer that is pretty close to the surface in a lot of areas of the watershed, we really have a lot of opportunities to have some pollution issues. And Tom, we've got about half of our streams have been identified as needing TMDLs or impaired, and a lot of those segments have more than one impairment: sediment, nutrients, pesticides, bacteria, all of those kinds of things. And so And you'll see the purple there at the bottom is the city of Wichita, the largest city in the state of Kansas. And so we have this interaction between the rural landscape and the urban landscape. And I've often told people that if you look at this it's kind of like a funnel. It all ends up in the city of Wichita, and it really does. And we've heard that, wherever a drop might hit in that watershed, it has the potential to get there. And so this is kind of the issues that we've been dealing with. When we wrote that plan and put that RAPS plan together, and again, we've modified it a couple of times, but we were fairly ambitious. We had 40-year goals to delist our streams and remove those TMDLs from those segments and lakes as well. Well, when we started having discussions with our leadership team and started trying to figure out, okay, where are we going to start and how are we going to address these issues and how are we going to make a difference, as we got into that process, we figured out that, well, we probably did not have enough resources to even begin to get at the issues in 40 years. And so because of that, we started trying to look at, well, okay, are there additional resources or partners that we can bring into the fold? And so this is kind of a list or a graph that just kind of highlights some of those players. And again, the rural landowners, the farmers and ranchers, the folks that I was used to working with, that I kind of had a relationship and I could talk to. We understood each other. But then what about our urban neighbors? A lot of things about them that I didn't understand, and certainly most of the folks in our leadership team didn't understand either. So we started to have some discussions with the city of Wichita and some of the players that are within that urban environment. And early on, when Bill Hargrove and Don Sneathen got together and created the Watershed Specialist Program back in 2000, there were 5 of us that were hired. And our mission was to go out and talk about water quality and tell people what TMDLs were, because most people had never heard that acronym, and start having those discussions. And a lot of those audiences that I would try to get in front of, when I was in a rural landscape, maybe talking to a group of farmers, there was a lot of finger pointing going on. Well, what about, what are the people in Wichita? What are the people in Hutch? What are they doing? And then the next week I'd go talk to a Lions Club, maybe in the city of Wichita. Well, those guys out there in the country, they're the problem. Well, it was very apparent that we needed to figure out how we could work together and begin to understand each other. Education. Those of us that work in Extension, we're about educating. And it was apparent that there was a lot of education that needed to happen so that we could kind of begin to understand each other and try to work together towards some of these goals that would benefit all of us. Maybe we didn't necessarily have the same pathway to get there, but in the end of the day, we all wanted a sufficient quality supply of water. So 2 projects, and the first one that we embarked on and working together was atrazine. And atrazine's not one that, when we start talking about soil conservation and conservation districts, and pesticides aren't usually the first one that comes up. Our local stakeholder leadership team decided to address atrazine initially. And why atrazine? Well, back to that underground aquifer. The city of Wichita has a recharge project where they attempt to capture high flows out of the river, put it into the aquifer, and then get credits to use that water at a later time. Well, much like the nitrates, if atrazine exceeds 3 parts per billion, then either they have to treat that water or they have to just simply wait until the level comes down. And so, if you've invested millions of dollars in infrastructure and you're trying to capture this water, having atrazine levels high is, it's dollars, and it's potentially water use for down the road. And so we began to talk to each other and say, okay, can we work together? Is there a way that the city and us as a RAPS group and K-State can work together to try to, minimize the risk of that atrazine? And I would tell you that at the time we started this and we started implementing in 2006, if we gathered samples throughout the growing season and averaged those out, you'd say, well, we don't have a problem. Well, we did have a problem because we saw spikes in the spring. You know, when do we typically put atrazine on? Well, it's right ahead or at planting time for corn and grain sorghum. When do we typically get our big runoff events? Well, April, May, June. So the timing was ideal to have these spikes, and so we'd see several spikes every year, and you know, they might come up and down, or they might come up and stay several days. And so our objective was to go out and educate growers on how to use atrazine so we could try to minimize those spikes and also keep atrazine out there as an option, because at that time there weren't many options on grain sorghum for good, effective, relatively expensive weed control. So I went to the city of Wichita and we talked about it, and they said, yeah, we're interested in participating in the program. And I said, you know, can we have 10,000? Will you make 10,000 available for us to use for incentives to go to growers? We don't know how this is going to work. We're going to go out and do everything we can to educate and try to get practices on the ground. State Conservation Commission matched that with 10,000, so we actually had a pool of 20,000 that first year. Well, we went out and we talked to crop consultants, dealers, farmers, and we managed to get all of it spent. This is just an incentive worksheet that we use. We do a lot of one-on-one contact, because we know that not every practice will fit in every operation, so we try to be flexible and find something that will work, that they can implement, and will help reduce that risk of atrazine leaving, and we base the amount of payment they get on the expected reduction. So, I told you we started implementing in 2006. You can see here's some summary of some results over that period of time. Over 1,300 growers have implemented. 92% of the ones that we talk to actually agree and go ahead and implement that BMP. Now that number has gotten higher as we've gone on. The first year or two we had some folks that, you know, it was just brand new and didn't do it, and now we're essentially at about between 95 and 100% pretty easily every year. We're basically at 300,000 acres. The $3 per incentive per acre fee doesn't sound like much money, does it? If I got 80 acres, give you $240 to use your atrazine a little differently, is that really, you know, much money? Well, the way I view it is it's an education fee, okay? It gives me the opportunity to have the discussion with the grower about how they're using atrazine, how they maybe can use it a little differently that might be more effective, because we know that if we get that rainfall event and it all leaves the field, we're not getting weed control, and then we're putting it in the stream. So let's figure out a way, and so that fee gives us an opportunity to have a discussion with them and have that, you know, that leads into a lot of other things. And what we've found out is that we can start out with the atrazine discussion, and then, well, maybe then we follow up with a discussion about tillage practices, nutrient management. You know, we start to have those kind of whole farm discussions on how they're really managing it. And it's worked. You know, a lot of people look at that and they say, never worked, but it has. You can see the numbers there. Early on, we did some fairly extensive water monitoring, trying to actually document or really find out if we really were making a difference. And our water monitoring showed that we really were in the watersheds that we concentrated really heavily on early. And our predictions of what we thought we might see in reductions were actually playing through. Let me talk just a little bit about the other program, and this is a newer partnership with the city of Wichita. And I would tell you that if we hadn't had the relationship and a really working relationship on the atrazine project, I don't know whether this one ever would have happened. And let me just back up for a minute. So I told you that the city made $10,000 available in that first year in 2006. We have been successful enough, and they are happy enough with the results that they're getting. They are now providing $80,000 a year to us to use for incentives. And so we don't have that matching State Conservation Commission funds anymore, but we have $80,000 from the city of Wichita. And oh, by the way, a few years ago, they called me up one day, and now this doesn't ever happen. But I get a phone call from the city of Wichita, and Ron, we think that education in the watershed is important. We see the value in that. We know your funds are limited. We would like to make some money available for you to do education. You know, and I'm on the other end of the phone thinking, what? They made $10,000 available for us to do education. That level is now up to $15,000. So they are providing a very substantial amount of funds for us to go out and work with producers in the watershed to get practices on the ground and not only educate about atrazine, but other practices as well. So the program that we call the Offsite BMP Implementation Program, and this is a type of trading. Tom won't let me call it trading, so we call it Offsite BMP Implementation. You did? Yeah, okay. So we've called it Offsite BMP Implementation, and really kind of how this discussion began was the Stormwater Advisory Board in the city of Wichita was charged, or they were appointed, and then they were charged with the mission of revising their stormwater manual. And in the city of Wichita, they're required to have an MS4 permit, which says that any development or redevelopment of an acre or more has to have post-construction controls. And in Wichita, it's sediment is the impairment that they're after. And so the picture of this thing in the bottom center of the slide, this hydrodynamic separator, pretty popular in Wichita. They put a lot of these in. They're really expensive to put in, north of $20,000, and then there's annual maintenance costs and permitting fees and all that sort of thing. And they don't really keep a lot of sediment out of the stormwater system. And so at some point when they were having their discussions, they invited me to come in and talk about what we were doing in a rural landscape to help with erosion and sediment leaving fields. And so I came in and we started talking about some of the things, you know, like converting to no-till and less tillage and, you know, all of that kind of suite of practices that you would all be very familiar with that help keep sediment on the field. And we started talking about the cost, and we did kind of a cost comparison and really broke that down on a per ton basis, what it would cost if you were in Wichita putting in one of these separators, or if you were if you were a farmer up here and you may be converted to no-till, you know, what's the cost, the incentive rate, all of that sort of thing. And by the time we'd finished that financial analysis, it was over $5,000 per ton of sediment within the city of Wichita that's what the cost was to keep that out of the stream system. And for the incentive rates that we were paying at that time, just to use no-till, conversion to no-till as an example, we were at about $40 per acre, which figured out to a little under $3 per ton. So we're spending $3 a ton of incentive rate, and yeah, that's about a 50% match. So okay, $6 a ton if we put the farmer contribution versus the over 5,000 within the city. And so we really started working toward trying to figure out how we could work together and have this, from a holistic standpoint, a very positive impact on the watershed as a whole and the stream system, and make it a little more economical for the development community. So we were able to put a program together that if a developer chooses to participate, then they pay an annual fee, pay it monthly. It works out, the fee that they came up with was $19 per acre of development. So it figures out to a little over $1 an acre per month that they just include with their water bill. And then those dollars come to us to help incentivize growers to put these practices on the ground. And, you know, here's kind of a chart that shows what our numbers were. We started at the end of 2016, so effectively we started kind of beginning of 2017. But you can see, you know, at the end of last year, we had about 1,200 acres of urban development that had chose to participate in the program, the off-site program. The city of Wichita's cost savings estimates $6.29 million by not putting those concrete structures in the ground, those hydrodynamic separators. And you know, we've got a 2-to-1 credit ratio minimum of, so for every ton of sediment in town, we've got to save at least 2 tons out in the rural landscape, which for us is fairly easy. Our soils are erosive enough that that hasn't been an issue. So we started out initially getting 500 acres of rural landscape soil or fields in the program. The program, offsite program, has grown enough that we've added another 300, so we're over 800 acres of conversion to no-till and intensive crop rotation that are participating in the program. We also know that not only are we saving the development community some dollars and having a really positive impact on the watershed, but there's some other benefits, you know, like phosphorus. So if we're keeping all that sediment on the field out in the rural landscape, we know we're getting a phosphorus benefit as well. You know, and if we really start looking at an ecosystem services benefits, you know, what's happening with that $6.29 million that we're saving that development community and ultimately those owners of those properties? We hope, you know, we don't have a good way to track that, but we think those dollars are probably being spent for other things within the community. So it's, you know, it's somewhat of an economic development aspect as well. You know, education, and I have to back up just a little bit because, you know, we've talked, you know, I mentioned that we're really in the business to educate and understand each other and develop partnerships. Well, when I started attending these monthly meetings with the Stormwater Advisory Board, and you know, the city initially they wanted to, you know, they were used to structures. So we started talking about stream bank stabilization and doing those kinds of things. Well, they're terribly, terribly expensive. And then we moved into a phase where they wanted to buy land along the streams. So they thought their idea of how to make this program work was to buy essentially buffer zones along the edges of the fields. You know, and I said, well, that's not going to work because how many farmers are actually going to sell you the land? And if they do, you can't afford it. And I kept bringing up these management kinds of things, and you know, that was a hard concept for them to get used to. But one day we were having this discussion about no-till, and one of the participants raises his hand and he says, Ron, tell me what no-till is. Now, all of us know what no-till is, but that really gets at the educational piece of trying to understand each other and what we're trying to do and what they're trying to do. And you know, it really brought home to me that we've kind of got to start in a lot of these conversations maybe at ground zero, you know, and build from there. And so we were able to put the program together, and, you know, the management practices, we had to build the price structure such that, you know, the two things that the city of Wichita kept telling me is this has to go into perpetuity. We never want to be out of money. Well, I'm thinking, you know, they're talking about 200 years, whatever, and I'm thinking I'm not going to be around 200, you know, but we had to meet that expectation, and they never wanted to be out of compliance with their permit. And so we built this price structure so that we signed 5-year contracts with the growers, and so at the end of 5 years, if they all vacate, go back to tilling, there's sufficient dollars to bring new folks in. We're at the end of that initial 5-year period, and I kept telling them we'll have 80% stay in, and it looks like that's going to be pretty close, at least on the first round. So anyway, it's been pretty successful. Just a few key points here to hit. You know, that that I think has helped us be successful in developing these partnerships between the urban and the rural communities is a lot of discussions, a lot of input, you know, and those take time. You know, it doesn't sometimes move as fast as what the funders would like for us to move, but it takes time and a lot of education in that. And we've heard trust mentioned several times. I often refer to it that we move at the speed of trust. We have to trust each other, and I've been really fortunate that, you know, that some of the area that I work in, I've been fortunate enough to have some folks work with me, and we had some trust already built with some of the growers and folks, but we've really worked hard at trying to build trust with our urban neighbors and other folks, and I think we've been fairly successful, but sometimes you just have to take the time and have those discussions and, you know, kind of move at a little slower pace and do it right and to get that positive result in the end. And you can see some of the other things there. We've been, you know, pretty flexible and, you know, tried to adapt as we move along through the process. So, Dean, I've probably used more than what I was supposed to. So, thank you.
All right, next up, I'm going to go ahead and forego my quick conversation. I'll say that till the very end. I think next we'll go straight to Fred and see how this actually applies in a little different sphere for what Garden City's doing for water reuse that Tom even mentioned earlier. So, Fred.
All right, folks, there's 11 minutes left, and I can see you itching in your chairs. I'm going to wake everyone up for a few minutes here. And I'm probably going to, there'll be some areas that frankly we're not going to cover in a lot of depth, but two things that I think are of interest to the group. Radionuclides in the Arkansas River Basin, basically from anywhere downstream of Pueblo Reservoir to somewhere in the first parts of Ford County. I'm not the expert on this. This is the life's work of people like Don Whittemore, people with Kansas Geological Survey, folks in Colorado have been looking at these same issues. But from a public water supply issue, these things have been brewing over a number of years, and we've had a relatively short history of regulation on radionuclides. So the reason the guy from Garden City is telling you about what happened in Lakin is because that's where I was. That's where I learned about water the hard way. So that community constructed a plant in 2012 and went online in late 2013, early 2014, basically to remove uranium from the groundwater. So that issue continues to be a problem. Lakin is able to take care of their issue with treatment, but other communities such as Deerfield, numerous public water supplies, not necessarily cities, but public water supplies around Garden City have been impacted by radionuclides. As a result, the city of Garden City has taken on wholesale water supply for a subdivision called Towns Riverview that's about 1,000 people. It has its own issues within its distribution system, but the majority of their water is provided by the city of Garden City. K-State Research and Extension, Garden City Station, now supplied by the city of Garden City. Johnson Reynolds, which is about a 50-unit rural subdivision, now supplied by the city of Garden City. All because of radionuclides, gross alpha issues in the groundwater supply. So as water levels continue to decline along the Ark River Basin, we will see more impact from this water. This kind of gives you, this is a terrible slide, but frankly, I borrowed it from the Geological Survey, and their slide was terrible too. So this basically, if you look at the top of this, the thing that we're looking at is the relationship between sulfate and uranium. They seem to like each other. We find that in areas where we find high levels of sulfate, if you look at the top half of that chart, that shows your concentration of sulfate. The lower is going to show your concentrations of uranium, and generally high sulfate is equaling higher uranium. If you'll notice, Lakin, I think, probably hit around 70 as a high for their uranium concentration. That's 2 times the maximum contaminant level. I think we've talked about nitrates quite a bit. The comment I'll make from a municipal public water supply issue on nitrates is public water supplies and really anyone that has holes in the ground need to take a serious look at what the condition of those are. At the surface, we can look at those, everything seems to be fine, but how that well is constructed below grade and where some of these layers in the geology are transporting nitrates, we may have a conduit to the aquifer. So City of Garden City has a well project that maybe KDHE will get approved for me here pretty quickly. It's been about 7 months. I love you. That's to address the nitrate issue. We imagine that a lot of these older public water supplies will run into issues as these wells age. Just borrowed this because a lot of people ask Garden City about water reuse. The last time I kind of gave a presentation in front of a group, this is what Garden City looked like. 200 days without half inch of rain, something of that neighborhood. It was looking pretty bleak. Then it went the opposite of bleak, and we were dealing with flooding issues and sewer infiltration and all that kind of good stuff. July, things improved quite a bit, and now we find ourselves in a much better position. What we're looking at in Garden City, as Tom mentioned in his presentation, is called Managed Aquifer Recharge, and that is a similar concept to ASR, Aquifer Storage and Recovery. Managed Aquifer Recharge, though, is looking at other ways to reclaim water. The City of Garden City is unique in one respect, is we have a source of reclaimed water which is imported. It's imported from cows. It's imported from milk. We have a milk drying facility in, oh, good gravy. I didn't know that was going to happen. We had a milk drying facility in Garden City. They remove the water from milk, they run it through their own waste treatment plant, reclaim that water, and then we share. They permit with the city, and that effluent treated water goes through the city's effluent discharge point, which is an NPDES permitted location. And so the city intends to utilize that water in addition to the city's own effluent in order to do some reuse in the area. So the big picture is Garden City uses a little over 2 billion gallons of water a year. That supports the city of Garden City. It supports a relatively large ethanol plant. It supports a milk drying facility. It supports all the other industries in there. And about half of that water is coming through our wastewater treatment plant. So there's a lot of things we can do with it. The primary thing we're looking to do with our water to reclaim it is to irrigate with it. There's nothing controversial about that. Communities have been using effluent water for irrigation for decades. We've been doing it for decades. The concept with what we're planning on doing is rather than irrigating next to our wastewater treatment plant, we intend to irrigate closer to our source of supply. So that involves moving the water, but that will be an opportunity for us to exchange water that an irrigator would otherwise be pulling out of the ground. They can leave that water in the ground. That's the hardest thing, is to get it in storage, whether it's through an ASR project or if it's through building reservoirs. That's the expensive part. If you have water and you can just leave it alone, that's kind of the maximum return for investment. The second item, so we get some recharge effect from that. Second item that's going to be down the road on this is going to be this full-on managed aquifer recharge, where we're taking treated water, we're probably doing some additional filtration and disinfection to it, and then it's basically going to be set out in areas where that water will percolate down into the aquifer. Tom was talking about his sandbox. My sandbox is a sandbox. If you've been south of Garden City, we have a lot of sand there. If you know about water treatment, sand is how a lot of water treatment occurs. So we want to take advantage of the natural geology there and the filtration impact of that to provide some aquifer recharge. That's simply what we're trying to do in Garden City. The reason this schematic is up here is for, I think one thing that's important when we talk about water treatment and what communities are trying to do with water is to understand that as the levels of complication go up in water reuse, if you look at that chart, every box on that chart is dollars. That is, you know, if you're looking at a reverse osmosis plant for a utility the size of the city of Garden City, you're talking $60 million at a minimum. If you're talking about direct potable reuse, you probably can double that number. So what we're trying to figure out in these communities is direct potable reuse is a reality. It's possible, it's done, but we can have similar effects of direct potable reuse with less capital investment. And the other thing to think about as well on reuse is as these treatment requirements increase, so does your loss of water. So if you're running, you have to realize when you run water through a treatment process, you're not going to realize everything you put into it. There is going to be a waste stream that's going to have its own disposal issues and associated problems, as we learned in Lakin when we started treating uranium. Where's the uranium go? Well, it goes with the rest of the rejected water 6,500 feet underground into the Arbuckle. The disposal solution for the treatment plant in Lakin was fully 1/3 of the project cost. So anyhow, that's the quick and dirty version of where we're at. This kind of shows what our reuse concept is. Hopefully I won't laser anyone, but our treatment plant is over here, and the idea is to pipe this over here, utilize it for farm ground that kind of borders our well field, and then develop some infiltration areas in cooperation with the Division of Wildlife and Parks to do some infiltration and groundwater recharge through this managed aquifer concept. So I think I'm going to call it, and it is 12 o'clock, so thank you.
Thanks, Fred. Thank you. Well, I'll speak quickly then to the agency's view. So you heard Matt, you heard multiple folks talk about the opportunities. Even during the water quantity discussion earlier today, we are rich with resources that are coming in. We want to take advantage of those to address these priority issues for Kansas, and water is at the center of that. Water conservation is a primary bucket, if you will, for us in the agency to hyper-focus on and generate our resources or focus our resources to that, whether it's water quality in the east and the west or water quantity in the west or east, however you want to view that. So we have our field staff working with our local conservation districts, our partnerships, our TSPs. We're adding more and more every day to provide that technical assistance to our producers across the state. So we'll continue to work in collaboration with all the partners that sit around the table, and certainly more importantly, the ranchers and farmers in the state of Kansas. So I'll quit with that. Now, the last thing I would ask, because we don't really have time for great questions, I'll just ask the same thing that Susan asked at the end of this morning's discussion. What are the key takeaways for today when it comes to water quality? And I'll start with Landon.
I'll probably mimic Ron when I say it comes back down to education, letting people know what's available, what's out there, and how to take advantage of it.
Just like with our bank accounts and with our football teams, just make tomorrow better than yesterday.
I guess I would just maybe just echo, I mean, really, a number of the comments from the water quantity panel this morning, and then just building off of what we touched on here. The moment in time that we're in, we have resources at the state and federal level that are looking to provide some of these technical and financial assistance opportunities for producers across the state. So looking to engage in partnerships to provide those sort of services to help address our quantity and quality issues. This is our moment in time, so let's make sure we seize it.
Relationships. Take the time to have face-to-face discussions, build relationships that turn into partnerships that turn into practice implementation.
Okay. Grace. So I'm sitting in this room and I see some familiar faces, but I also see a number of unfamiliar faces. And what I would ask is that when we share information, as a city shares information with our rural partners and vice versa, that we don't get locked into a thought where, well, I shared that with them and it didn't click, and so we're moving on. Keep sharing your message. I know I was visiting with one of our Conservation District members at the Governor's Water Conference, and he was like, you know, Fred, people have questions about what's going on in town, and they're concerned about things, and they want to know about water. You know, we have golf courses and people that tend to water their street and things like this, and this doesn't play well. And I said, well, you know, we understand that, but we also have a lot of things that we have been working on that we feel like we've made some good progress on to improve the situation. And so we just need to reach out of our comfort zone a little bit and have a little bit of grace for each other. Sometimes that clicks in a conversation and helps us find a partnership. So don't give up. Keep telling your story, and we'll try to continue telling ours.
Fantastic. Thank you all so much. Let's give the panelists a round of applause. Thank you. Sorry, Bill.
So thank you again, Dean. Thank you, panelists. So that concludes our morning session, and that also concludes our convention. So I want to thank everybody that came, thank all our sponsors, the vendors, the district managers, but especially thank all the supervisors that came. And this made a really great convention this year. I think we had the biggest turnout we've had for several years. And again, we really appreciate that. So as you leave today, have safe travels home. Your name tags, we'd like to reuse those, recycle those, so please stop by the registration desk and drop those off. So again, thank you. We'll see you again next year.